There's a Bentley tower going up on the Miami coast. Not a dealership, not a showroom, a residential skyscraper. Car badge on the brochure. $630 million of construction loans sitting behind the rebar. On paper, this looks like the safest bet money can buy. The brand, people whisper about it, valet. The oceanfront, everyone pretends is permanent. The biggest construction loan headline South Florida had all year. Here's the problem. A building can be marketed like a Bentley and financed like a fortress and still be the kind of project that shouldn't exist. Not because luxury is illegal, because the ground, the deal, and the people who aren't holding the bag don't line up the way the renderings say they do. I'm talking about Miami's $630 million Bentley Tower, the one that shouldn't exist. Stay with me, because once you see how this thing was built to look bulletproof, the question stops being, will it sell? It starts being, why was this allowed to rise at all? And to understand that, you have to start with who actually owns the risk, because it isn't the name on the glass. The developer is a company called Deezer Development. Miami real estate people know the name. They've been putting up towers on that stretch of sunny isles for years. Fine. That's who's actually building this thing. Bentley, though, the actual car company, is not out there in a hard hat pouring concrete. Let me repeat that because it matters. This is a branded residence deal, which is the polite legal way of saying the automaker licensed its name, licensed some interior design cues, collected a fee, and let somebody else deal with the 200-foot piles. That's not a scandal. That is the whole branded residence industry. Porsche did it up the coast. Aston Martin did it downtown. Bentley is doing it here. It works because status is portable, and liability is even more portable if your paperwork is tight. And the paperwork here is tight. Trust me. Hold that thought, because when I say who owns the risk, I don't just mean legally. I mean when something goes sideways in year 15, when the elevator that lifts your car to the sky decides it wants a sabbatical, when the HOA meeting turns into a bar fight over special assessments. Who is on the other end of that phone call? Not the guys in Crew England designing two-door coupes. It's a Miami LLC with a 5-syllable name. All right, now let me tell you what they're actually selling. Because the pitch is unreal. 61 stories on the sand at 18401 Collins Avenue. Around 216 residences, roughly 716 feet of oceanfront tower. Every single unit gets its own private sky garage. Not a garage in the basement, a garage that comes up with you in an elevator, so your car rides the tower like a very expensive dumbwaiter. They call it the Deservator. That is a real word. In the marketing, somebody signed off on that. Think about this for a second. They didn't just sell you a condo. They sold you a personality with a parking space attached to your living room. Your car goes to sleep next to your bed. You wake up, you make espresso, you nod at the McLaren through the sliding door, you get in, and the whole apartment rides you down to street level. I'm not even mad. I'm impressed. That is a beautiful piece of marketing. They'll put your car in the sky like it's a sacred relic. The dirt under the building, unfortunately, does not care what logo is on the hood. The Real Deal reported the project was more than 50% pre-sold around the time that $630 million loan closed. That's the confidence flex. Look, half the building is already spoken for. This is a done deal. I would gently point out that pre-sold in Miami condo world historically means deposit down, closing later. Please pray with us until 2028. Because 2028 is the delivery number that keeps showing up in press. Not a guarantee, a mood. Here's what gets me. Look at how many separate names are in this story. There's Bentley, the brand. There's Deezer, the developer. There's the lender syndicate holding the $630 million. That loan close in November 2025 was covered by Bloomberg, The Real Deal, Florida Yemby, Multi-Housing News, big deal in the trade press. And then there's you, the buyer. At the very end of that chain, wire in one hand, rendering in the other, hoping. Now guess which name gets the biggest logo. Guess which name is legally furthest from the ground. The most famous name in the whole story is usually attached to the party with the least to answer for. That is not an accident. That is the business model of branded real estate. If the badge is on the glass, why isn't the badge on the debt? Ask yourself that once, just once. And the whole industry starts looking like a costume party where the rebar shows up in a rented tux. That's the part that starts to bother me. Not the car elevator, not the champagne lobby, the distance. The legal distance between the name that got you excited and the entity that actually has to answer when something breaks. Okay, let's talk about the ground. November 2025, Deezer poured what they called a record residential mat foundation. The numbers in the press were around 20,000 cubic yards of concrete, roughly 36 hours of continuous pouring, thousands of tons of rebar and steel underneath, laced together like the world's most expensive lasagna. They reported it as the second largest foundation pour in the entire United States by the project's own claims. That's the kind of number you put on a marquee. That's the kind of number that sells another 20 units. Here's what did not go on the marquee. The Miami Herald, reporting on Florida high-rise settlement concerns, quoted geotechnical language that basically says predicting how heavy towers settle in South Florida is extremely difficult. Extremely difficult. That's not some YouTube channel with scary music. That is the boring, careful language people use when they have to sign engineering documents with their real names on them. And for Bentley specifically, that reporting noted engineers recommended deep support piles on the order of about 200 feet, described as roughly the maximum depth currently possible in that area. For a 700-plus foot tower, do you feel that? That little wobble in your chest? That's the gap between we did the biggest pour in Florida and we are going as deep as it is physically possible to go, and the language is still hedged. Now, I want to be careful. I want to say this clearly because there is a version of this story I am not telling you. I have not seen a credible primary source claim this building, today, is measurably sinking. If you saw a video with a scary CGI tilt and a whooshing sound effect, I would want to see the paperwork before I bought that story. I'm not going to sell you a lie to keep you watching. That's not what this is. But we poured the biggest foundation in Florida, and predicting settlement here is extremely difficult live in the same construction file. Both are real, only one of them makes it to the sales flyer, and that's the part that makes the whole thing feel wrong. That's the accounting nobody is showing you. So when I say Miami's $630 million Bentley Tower shouldn't exist, I'm not saying concrete is illegal. I'm not saying the crane is going to fall over tomorrow. I'm saying a project that pours a record foundation while the engineers around it use the phrase extremely difficult in the documents and then puts a car badge on the front door and calls the whole thing invincible has stopped telling you the truth about itself. That is the shouldn't exist part right there. That is what I mean. Which brings me to the part that's actually worse. It's not that the ground is hard. Ground is hard everywhere heavy things get built near water. I get that. That's construction. That is not news. It's that we are being sold certainty, a badge, a record pour, a 9-figure loan, a word like deservator. All of that is certainty theater. And underneath it, the real language, the language in the reports, is uncertainty. Record leverage on top, question marks on the bottom. Buyers in the middle who think they're paying for engineering. What they're actually paying for is the story of engineering, the vibe of engineering, the performance. And it's not one building. That's the second part that gets me. Look up and down that coast. Porsche across the way. Aston Martin farther south. Bentley here. Every one of them taller. Everyone heavier. Everyone further into the we've solved it mood. Every one of them a branded residence deal. Everyone with a car logo on the front door and a Miami LLC on the deed. Nobody plans a coastline. A coastline just happens to you. And this one has happened in about 10 years to look like a garage rack. A row of towers where the marketing was always confident and the ground was always the same. Real quick, if you're getting something out of this, subscribe. This channel does US mega project stories every week. We don't do the fake shock. Nobody here is going to CGI, the building tilting into the ocean to keep you watching. That is beneath us. All right, moving on, because now it gets bigger. Zoom out one more click. The pattern isn't one bad developer. I want to be super clear on that. Nobody in this story is twirling a mustache. The pattern is brand licensing fees are cheap money for automakers. Pre-sales are easy to raise in Miami dollars. Construction loans get a little bigger every cycle. And the specific human who ends up owning the maintenance nightmare in 2045 is a completely different human from the one who cashed the check in 2024. Everyone in the middle is aligned. The brand gets paid up front. The developer gets paid at delivery. The lender gets paid on interest. The broker gets paid on pre-sale. The buyer pays and pays and pays. And the guy holding the tail risk, the guy sitting in the HOA meeting arguing about a special assessment in 25 years, is a stranger to every single person who made this deal happen. He hadn't even bought his condo yet. That's the trick. That's how you build something that shouldn't exist. You spread the incentives so wide that nobody has to look at the whole picture. You never let one person hold the entire consequence in their hands. Now, I need to say something clearly, and I need you to hear me on this one. When I say shouldn't exist, I am not saying this tower is going to collapse. I am not comparing it to Surfside. The Champlain Tower's South collapse in 2021 was a specific building, a specific set of failures, a specific tragedy. Nothing in the public reporting on Bentley residences claims that this project caused that or is going to repeat it, saying it would be a lie. I don't do that. Not for clicks, not for a thumbnail, not for anything. What I am saying is that Florida high-rise coastal building has a memory now. That coast remembers. And a new tower is rising into that memory with a car logo on the front door, a headline loan behind it, and a line in the engineering language on the back page that says, again, extremely difficult. Both things get to be true at the same time. You're allowed to notice both. So where does this stand right now? At the moment I'm recording this. Under construction. Foundation, done. Done in headline-grabbing scale. Delivery in the press pointed at 2028. Anyone who has watched a Miami condo project knows 2028 is a mood, not a promise. Around 216 residences waiting on their sky garages, a $630 million construction loan doing what construction loans do, which is either turn into a completed building or a very interesting court filing. And the badge. Always the badge, right there on the front, reminding you every time you look at it that you were supposed to feel safe about this. Here's where I land. Buildings this big are supposed to be boring. That is the compliment. When engineering goes right, nobody notices. The elevator works, the concrete holds, the tower stays. Boring. That is the whole goal. Bentley Residences is the opposite of boring. It is theater. It is a record loan. It is a record pour. It is a word like deservator on a spec sheet. It is a car brand on a front door of a home nobody in that car brand is ever going to live in. It is 50% pre-sold to people who will not turn a key for another 3 years. It is a foundation going as deep as it is physically possible to go, in a soil profile where the engineers already told you, in writing, that the answer is uncertain. That is not a building. That is a bet. A very expensive, very confident, very well paperwork bet that the story will hold together until everybody involved has already gotten paid and moved on. And bets like that are always fine, until the one time they aren't. Between the badge and the loan, between the render and the rebar, between extremely difficult in the engineer's file and invincible in the sales deck, you can feel the gap. That gap is the whole story. They shouldn't have been allowed to sell you certainty this loud on a coastline, this honest about how little of it there really is. That's the sentence. That's the whole video in one sentence. The building is going up. The paperwork is closed. The money moved. Nobody is stopping it. But the next time you drive past that stretch of Collins Avenue and you see the crane and the wrap and the badge on the side, I want you to remember that shouldn't exist isn't about concrete. It's about consent. It's about what they told you the deal was versus what the deal actually is. And on that scoreboard, this thing is losing before it even opens.